I'm Lauren Hobler, and I'm an MTS student here at SVU.
I'm Bryce Hagen. I'm also an MTS student here.
My name is Wes. I'm also an MTS student here.
I'm Nathan. I'm an MDiv here at BU.
I'm Hope Hamilton, and first year MTS student.
I'm Monique. I'm a first year MDiv student. Selma, you know me.
I'm Corey. I'm an STM student.
I'm Blake. I'm a second year MTS.
I'm Amy. I'm a second year MDiv student.
I'm Memory, second year MTS student.
My name is Sandra. I'm a first year MTS student.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a first year MDiv student.
Hi, I'm Katie.
MDiv, second year. Andrea, second year MTS.
Jeremy, STM.
I'm Guangxi, I'm a first year STM student.
I'm Hisung Lee. I'm second year MDiv student.
I'm Kyunun, STM student.
I'm Erin, STM student.
My name is John from Korea, STM student.
Missed your name.
John, J-U-N-G.
John.
And Mary Elizabeth. Welcome.
Thank you.
I do want to say a personal word. Yeheskel is one of the most inspirational people in my life, and I often think of you when I am in a hard place, trying to figure out what to do next on something. You have a quality of life about you. The work you've done over your lifetime is quite incredible, and we feel greatly honored to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're in your hands to lead us in the meditation, and then this group will take us from there.
Okay. In the Jewish tradition, we end many prayer services and the grace after meals with an appeal to God to make peace among us on earth the way God makes peace in some celestial heavenly realm. In Hebrew, the prayer affirmation and appeal as it appears in the standard prayer book would be Oseh Shalom B'Mroma, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'Yiru. Amen. So may the one who makes peace in the highest heavens make peace among us and among all of the Jewish people, and let us say Amen. Okay. So when I say that, I add V'al Kol B'nei Yishmael, all the Arabs who see themselves as descended, especially Arab Muslims descended from Ismail, V'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, and all the world's inhabitants. So to make it as inclusive as possible. So what I invite us to do for a minute or two is just to imagine a heavenly peace implemented, realized on earth. Whatever you think peace means in a supernatural sense, outside of this world, how would God through us bring that about? Think about that, imagine that. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will and ours.
Dr. Landau, on behalf of Boston University School of Theology, welcome, Shalom. And we welcome you to this class, Narrative Interfaith Peacemaking, on March 24th, 2015. I'd like to start off, if I could share a bit of your biography with the class, to welcome you to your life. Yehezkel Landau is presently Associate Professor of Interfaith Relations and holder of the Abrahamic Partnerships Chair at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut. His areas of engagement and teaching include Jewish tradition and spirituality, Jewish Christian-Muslim relations, and religion, conflict, and peacemaking. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard University and a Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School. Following the conclusion of his studies at Harvard, he made Aliyah to Israel and dedicated his work towards Jewish-Arab peacemaking as a dual Israeli-American citizen. During his time there, through the 1980s, he directed the Oz V'Shalom Nativot Shalom peace movement, dedicated to bringing unity and pluralism within Israel. Dr. Landau's peace and social justice leadership led him to collaboratively found and direct Open House Ramla, a peace education center for Jewish-Arab coexistence in Ramla, Israel. He also lectures internationally on Judaism, interfaith relations, and Middle East peace and conflict studies. And in his present leadership at Hartford Seminary, where he received his doctorate of ministry, Dr. Landau directs an interfaith training program called Building Abrahamic Partnerships, which engages Jews, Christians, and Muslims in extensive leadership workshops. So we welcome you, we welcome our listening and learning to your life journey, and thank you again. So I'd like to start off, if I could, with reflections you may have on those significant moments in your life's journey, any significant moments and events.
Well, thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. Major transitions, I guess. Well, it began when my family moved from South America to North America when I was 3.5, but I don't remember much about that. And the shift from Spanish to English when we moved from Santiago de Chile to New York City. So that was my first international move, courtesy of my parents, who had fled Vienna just in time in March 1938. And some of my relatives never got out of Europe alive in the Second World War. So I grew up in the United States, outside New York City, and in my mid to late 20s, after I'd gotten the 2 degrees from Harvard and had studied psychology, theology, and education, I felt I needed to get myself to Israel, to Jerusalem in particular, as the last person in my family to ever visit there and the only one who stayed for close to 25 years. And that had been bubbling up in me for a few years, especially as a result of keeping a dream journal, which I have done since February 1974, when I began my MTS studies at Harvard Divinity School. So this has been a spiritual practice for me, paying attention to my dreams. So the dream of homecoming for Jews, which is in the Psalms and in prophetic, visionary texts in the Hebrew Bible, this became a personal aspiration and yearning for me. So when a rabbi gave me a one-way El Al ticket, I flew to Israel in April of 1978 and stayed there until I got my job at Hartford Seminary in 2002. So, and I never thought I would come back to the United States to live or work, but circumstances continue to surprise me. So the move to Jerusalem as a practical laboratory for religious peace building, that was a major shift in existential coordinates for me. I'll say something about the different work settings that kept me employed and active and challenged. The shift back to the United States, the reverse plane trip in 2002 was prepared for by a number of things, including prayerful discernment, the Second Intifada, and the 9/11 attacks in New York and Washington, and the plane that went down to Pennsylvania, and my sense that the pathologies that were afflicting us in the Middle East, keeping us stuck in this no-win conflict, had gone global, with the Peace of Jerusalem at the core of what was not peaceful in our world. So Hartford Seminary hired me as the first full-time Jewish professor, and I've been gratified to have that as a laboratory for building constructive relationships among people of different faiths as activists for change in the wider world. So it's another microcosm. As Jerusalem is a bigger microcosm, Hartford Seminary is a microcosm. We're all in the middle of microcosms. We are individual microcosms of humanity, and our networks extend the opportunity to influence our world for the good, so that whatever peace means in the highest heavens can be brought into being here. So those two transitions, becoming an Israeli and working in Israel-Palestine for reconciliation out of my religious convictions, and then bringing that whole quarter century of experience back to the United States with kind of global outreach. Those are the two major transitions in my life. Becoming a father is another one. Yes. Okay.
Could you reflect in the first transition into Israel some of the relationships or communities that helped support that transition or served as strong guidance?
Guidance. Well, I was privileged, really blessed, to find allies, partners in the Jewish community within Israel, Palestinian Christians and Muslims, some Druze and Baha'is, who see this holy land as a laboratory for justice and loving kindness, which is what I understand it to be biblically, which is why it pains me to see it desecrated by injustice and violence. That was one of the incentives that brought me. I just could not see the horrific news accounts coming out of Jerusalem. The prophet says, out of Zion, out of this holy center, at the center will come divine teaching. And that's not what we see on the news every day. So that brought me there and kept me there. That was one. There were really two incentives that brought me there. One, to live a more deeply Jewish life in a majority Jewish community, the only one on earth, really. And what sovereignty for Jews means really puts us to the test now. We can't complain that Muslims and Christians treat us unfairly when the shoe's on our foot and we have non-Jewish minority communities in the state of Israel. That's one covenantal commitment that I think we have from Sinai. So to be more Jewishly grounded. The other is to, from that faith understanding, to work for more inclusive justice and reconciliation. And I think the Holy Land is still a sacred laboratory for the whole earth, that the mystic inside me would say the whole cosmos.
Is there a particular event or extreme transformative time when you came to Israel that resounds in you so much in your memory still?
Oh, quite a few. I remember one now that the first paid job I had was as the program coordinator for an organization called the Israel Interfaith Association, which had me planning study days for Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Baha'is, visiting one another's places, and overcoming their kind of parochial self-segregation. And I remember watching the evening news once, and I saw an Israeli military commander in the West Bank with sunglasses on. Opaque sunglasses reminded me of Cool Hand Luke. Remember that iconic image of the policeman with sunglasses. And this fellow, this military commander, speaking in Hebrew, was saying how the riots on the West Bank at that time, okay, this was before the first Intifada even, were a passing phase, and Israel can take care of this militarily. You know, we have the resources, the wherewithal to essentially suppress this popular discontent. And I looked at it and I said, I've been in this movie. This sounds like General Westmoreland in South Vietnam. And which was the formative period in my life. The war in Indochina had really confirmed my vocation as a peacemaker, which actually goes back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in the month of my bar mitzvah, September 1962. So there have been other watersheds when I said, something's wrong with this big picture. Our species is endangered because of our stupidities and resistances to change. And how, you know, as I grow into adulthood, how can I take some responsibility for ensuring that my children and subsequent generations will have a human ecology that isn't radioactive or somehow otherwise polluted. So at that moment, when I saw that military commander, and I said, well, I left the United States and I came to Israel, but the human dynamic is the same. And this illusion of solving political conflicts through military means, which I understood was just mission impossible and counterproductive. Okay, that's followed me here. Same challenge. What am I going to do about it? So I actually quit my job and the next day, and it affected me so strongly. And I created the position I had for the next 10 years, which was directing this religious peace movement, Oz V'Shalom, which then got extended to Oz V'Shalom, Nitivot Shalom, when another religious Zionist group was founded in '82 as a result of the Lebanon campaign that Ariel Sharon launched then. So that was, the first one was really interfaith, but more inter than faith. And the second one was faith-based peace building from a Jewish, Israeli, religious Zionist foundation, reaching out to Palestinians to consecrate the land together, which I think is what God is calling us to do.
Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Could you expand upon what it was like to start the Oz V'Shalom peace movement, and maybe particular challenges or communities that were trying to come into that movement?
I didn't found it. It was founded by essentially religious academics at Hebrew University, Bar Ilan University, Tel Aviv University in 1975. So when I joined it, more or less 78, it had been in existence, but didn't have a paid staff. So I created one. Its mission was basically twofold, I would say, within the Jewish community. to give a religious dimension to the peace camp and a peace politics to the religious community. They call themselves religious Zionists. And in the second aspect, to counter the growing settler movement that saw religious Zionism in largely territorial terms. And the land claim trumped justice and peace in inclusive terms. So that prophetic and priestly imperative was undermined by some kind of pseudo-messianic ideology of control and settlement of the whole of the land of Israel. So that was the challenge. That was the double challenge of getting non-observant Israeli Jews to appreciate what the holiness of the land really means, because it didn't mean anything to them. So they could easily give up control of and access to Hebron, Jericho, Shechem, Nablus. They didn't care. And those who had built settlements around those places or in those places, they cared a lot, but they didn't care about sharing the holiness of the land with Palestinians. They thought the chosenness or the election of Israel gave us some kind of exclusivist dispensation. And their obligation was to make sure no non-Jewish sovereignty would emerge there. So we saw this as anti-messianic. This was getting in the way of any kind of practical messianism, which is my politics, my theology is based on transformation of conflict to healing of broken and resentful hearts. So this was just adding fuel to resentment and despair on both sides. And I hate to say, subsequent events have just confirmed that my kind of diagnosis, or our kind of diagnosis, of the disease, of the political and spiritual pathologies that afflict us, have seemed to corroborate our diagnosis. So, how to get underneath the political rhetoric that keeps us divided and defiant I think it requires spiritual remedy. So my whole work is based on the conviction that our political pathologies need spiritual remedies. That political roadmaps and peace agreements are insufficient. You might make that argument anywhere in any conflict situation. And I've been to Sarajevo, I've been to Belfast, I've been to Nigeria. To me, it's really not much different in other conflicts. There's a spiritual dimension to the creation of the conflict or sustaining the conflict, and there are spiritual imperatives in any political agreement to transform that conflict into some kind of peaceful coexistence. And that's hard for Americans to grasp because of our separation of religion and state governance. So to say that American foreign policy should have a spiritual component causes allergic reactions in the State Department, for example. The executive branch and maybe the legislative branch. And I can give you all kinds of stories of trying to convince American diplomats that a spiritual dimension is required. I can share one story. Okay, you want me to share a story? No names. But back in 1991, I spoke with 2 American diplomats in Jerusalem who were very active in the Israeli-Palestinian issue. One lived there, one was working at the State Department and was visiting. Anyway, they invited me to breakfast to pick my brains. 1991, this was in advance of the I think the first Gulf War had just ended and the Madrid peace process under the first President Bush and James Baker was about to happen, and I think they wanted some input. So my suggestion was this, that the two superpowers broker an agreement based on a linkage between the exodus of Soviet Jews and the homecoming of Palestinians to a Palestinian state. Okay? So you had Gorbachev in the Kremlin, you had Papa Bush in the White House. And if they could work out an agreement, here's how I envisioned it. That they would meet for a summit. Camp David, Moscow, didn't matter. They would come out from their meeting and stand before the microphones, and George Herbert Walker Bush would say to Mikhail Gorbachev, okay, tell them what we just talked about and agreed on. And Gorbachev would come to the microphone and address then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir, probably the most hardline ideologue who's ever held that office, against a two-state territorial compromise his whole life. And Gorbachev would say, okay, Mr. Shamir, my question to you is, what does Zionism mean? For you, does it mean less Jews on more land or more Jews on less land? I have the Jews, you control the land, let's make a deal. Okay, I will let the 1 million Jews held captive in this kind of greater gulag called the Soviet Union, and you had the prisoners of Zion, Sharansky and other people in prison at the time. I'll let them all go, and they don't have to go to transit camps in Italy, Rome, or Vienna. They'll go straight to Tel Aviv, to Ben Gurion Airport, from Kiev, Moscow, it was probably still Leningrad, the day St. Petersburg, on condition that our client, Abu Ammar, Yasser Arafat, have a chance to welcome his exiled people, Palestinian refugees, especially from 47, 48, back to part of the land called Palestine. What do you think? Well, I said to these two diplomats, what do you think? And they looked at me and they couldn't figure out what I was saying. You mean we should link the human rights issue of people leaving the Soviet Union, which includes Jews, Armenians, Pentecostals, and others, and Middle East peacemaking, where we have people like Dennis Ross, Aaron David Miller. We have people working on that, and we have people working in human rights. You want us to bring these two agencies of the State Department together to work out a bigger... Yes, I said think more holistically. Imagine what that would be. That doesn't make sense to us. They said they couldn't make that connection. And I said, okay, then let me ask you a question. If you have a peace process in Washington and the peace train leaves Union Station, how are you going to get the Jewish settlers on the holy hilltops of occupied Palestine to get on board that train? And they gave me the all-American answer. I'm going to use this language, we will buy them out. We will compensate them monetarily the way we did for the settlers in northern Sinai, Yamit and the other settlements that were evacuated and actually destroyed as part of the peace agreement with Anwar Sadat and the Egyptian government. That's what we'll do it again. So I said, look, I cannot speak for American taxpayers, whether they want their tax dollars to fill the coffers of these settlers and compensate them in that way, but I can pretty much assure you they did not go out there as real estate speculators to earn a profit. They went out there as messianists to bring the Messiah sooner, and unless you compensate them in messianic currency, they won't budge. And 1 million Jews, this goes back to all kinds of prophetic texts, from the north, from Russia. In Hebrew, Rasha means evil. So you can project anything you want on the Soviet Union or Russia. Yes, to bring back 1 million exiles to the Holy Land, that could be presented as a messianic development to compensate for contracting the borders of the State of Israel and letting the Palestinian refugees go home. Anyway, they didn't I don't think they grasped what I was saying. I came to Washington, D.C. I tried to speak to people on Capitol Hill. Didn't work. Anyway, that was a lesson in the limits of the religious imagination to capture the minds of, and spirits of, can I say, diplomats trained in utilitarian, basically secular methods of peace building, or mediation, or conflict resolution or transformation. So it's obvious to me, living within that conflict, that you need you have to think, feel, imagine out of the box. So far, I haven't seen anything, even in the latest diplomacy from Secretary Kerry, I have not really seen any evidence that America is thinking and acting out of the box. So that saddens me as a dual citizen. That's one of the reasons I chose to return to the United States from Jerusalem. I felt, with the Second Intifada and with 9/11, that the leverage points are not in Jerusalem and Ramallah, let alone Gaza. The two traumatized, victimized peoples who are just mutually wounding one another are stuck, really stuck, in victim and vindication scripts that don't make room for one another in the heart, the mind, and therefore on the map. So it will require help, including spiritual help from political and religious leaders outside. So I thought the United States of America, as the one lone superpower after the nonviolent deconstruction of the Russian Empire called the Soviet Union, that the United States I still think, this country is still the major determinant of among all others, but because we are so powerful, we are more responsible for ensuring the peace and security of the world. How are we doing? You think we're doing that job well?
No.
I don't think so. I don't think so either. We could do a lot better, but that would require some kind of more spiritual or religious sophistication about how conflicts, where they are grounded in the human psyche and personality, and how we transform them. Here's my three-part agenda. Okay, transforming fear to trust, anger to forgiveness, grief to compassion for the suffering of others. That's what I think religious peace building is really about. Fear, anger, and grief keep us trapped, emotionally invested in conflict. We have all kinds of ideological justifications, but the real emotional matrix in which we live and feel and then act out of those feelings are fear, anger, and grief. So how we transform fear to trust, requirement number one. Anger to forgiveness that could take a generation. Trust building is the key thing first. Grief, we've all lost people dear to us, and land, and power. We're grieving, we're mourning those losses. How do we appreciate that our enemy, our adversary, is feeling exactly those same three feelings? Strong emotional investments. And that requires empathy. And that's part of what the educational process is about. More than you bargained for in that last question.
I was wondering if you could talk about those spaces which you helped to create of peace building and trust building, such as Open House Ramla. If you could talk about the trust that was built in those spaces that you helped contribute, and some of your contributions towards trust and peace in those organizations.
Okay. After working with the Osva Shalom, Netivot Shalom religious peace movement for close to a decade, I felt I needed something more tangible to put into practice what I was teaching and sharing with my peace partners. I really needed a more practical laboratory. So, I don't know how many of you know this book by Sandy Tolan called The Lemon Tree. Are you aware of this book? Was any of it assigned to you? Yes?
For different Israel, Palestine, some.
Okay, so you know, anybody not know this book? Okay, so this is the story of two people and their families, okay? An Israeli Jewish woman to whom I was married for 25 years, Dalia Ashkenazi Landau, okay? And Bashir Al-Khairi, Palestinian Muslim, and they have called the same house in Ramle, between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, not the Ramallah, West Bank, Ramle. They've called it home before and after July 1948. So this is the story of two families, one shared house and garden as a kind of symbolic microcosm of a homeland of two peoples of different religious traditions not being able to share it equitably or compassionately. So Open House is based in that house. The lemon tree was planted by Ahmed Al-Khairi in the late 1930s in the backyard. The family was expelled by the Israeli military in July of 1948, along with over 95% of the inhabitants of Ramla and nearby Lod. That's 70,000 of the 750,000 Palestinian refugees from that war ended up outside the borders of Israel, including the Al-Khairi family. So the house was empty, and my former wife's family moved in from Bulgaria. Dalia grew up there and didn't meet the Al-Khairis until they came to the door after the Six-Day War, or the June War of 1967. And the two families met and have been in touch for what, 48 years. So that's the story I married into. And at the end of the 1980s, after Dalia had inherited the house under Israeli law from her deceased parents, we met with Bashir Al-Khairi in Ramallah at an Anglican priest's home. That was a sacred meal I'll never forget. Anglicans, a Muslim communist, two observant Jewish Israelis breaking bread together in the priest's wife. This was Audi and Patricia Rantisi. And we talked about what to do about this house that had been Bashir's family's home and now Dalia's family's home, and she had inherited it. So Open House grew out of that. So it's been dedicated, sacrificed and dedicated, so I would say consecrated by both families as a peace laboratory. And there's a component that sponsors affirmative action programs for Arab toddlers, from Christian and Muslim families, Israeli Palestinians in the Ramla Lod, the first ever daycare center in Arabic in the history of Ramla, and joint activities for Arab and Jewish children and adults. So it was founded in 1991, and it's still functioning in 2015. So the biblical verse that rings true for me as a kind of the spiritual foundation for this, in Genesis 12:3, verse 3. Ibrahim is called from modern-day Iraq, near Basra, Iraq, or Mesopotamia, to come to this land that God would show him, which ended up being Canaan. And he said, and God says to Abraham, through you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Kol mishpachot ha'adamah, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's as inclusive a promise and blessing as you'll ever find in any religious text. So you had three families of the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths. The Christian family was an Anglican family named Fanus, which joined with the Algeris and the Ashkenazi Landaus to create Open House back in, we opened in April 1991, just after the First Gulf War. So the question is how you share the blessing of inclusive justice and peace, reconciliation in the heart, musalaha, not just sulha, a truce, but musalaha, real acceptance and forgiveness. How do you do that? How do you do that? How do we do that? When conflicts not just divide us politically, but cripple our imaginations and block our hearts, keep them closed, not open. How do we open our closed hearts and expand our narrowed imaginations? How do we do that? So it helps to have a little demonstration laboratory to say, hey, look, it's happening on a small scale. It can happen. Human beings are capable of doing this in the middle of a war zone, creating a little zone of peace, equality, compassion. Last summer, in the middle of the third destructive, horrific confrontation between Hamas and Israel, the Jewish and Arab women who run an annual a summer peace camp, and two campers, a Jewish boy and an Arab girl, were on Channel 10 of Israeli television in the middle of the war, showing that they are having this summer camp experience counter to everybody else's experience, which is running to bomb shelters or avoiding rockets coming into Gaza. And one of the interviewers said, you created a little zone of sanity in the middle of rampant insanity. Yeah, that's what it seems like, right? Who is sane and who is insane? You know, it's like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Yeah, it's, some of you have gone there recently, right? Well, you can see the news that comes out of there. That's not sane, it's not healthy, not very hopeful. So if you want to tap in like a sacred well to hope underground, you know, well springs of hope, you have to, well, it's good to have some kind of prayer life and follow your dreams and have other spiritual disciplines to counter the contamination that's going to come your way through the newspaper or the TV set. But I think it's really important to live a good part of your waking life in networks of peaceful cooperation. So that's what we do for children and adults. That's what Open House is. To open hearts. Open House is meant to open hearts and keep them open minds, imagination. Website, friendsofopenhouse.org.
Thank you. How did you bring the work that you did in Israel in your transition back to America?
It's okay. Just went down the wrong tube. So I don't know what Mary Elizabeth is trying to do. Okay, this will be edited out. I think I heard that, but you can say it again. And then the video can pretend that I never called. Go ahead.
How did you take all of the work that you did in Israel, all the community that you built, back to America in your transition?
Thank you. How did that reverse transition happen? Well, I've been working for Open House from here the last 13 years. So that's still my connecting point to transformation of conflict, that particular micro laboratory. The work I've been doing at Hartford Seminary and other places, like this room right now, have that reality in heart and mind for me. Because I can see the particularistic context of Jews and Palestinians stuck in this debilitating conflict. And I see, especially having visited other war zones, what the universal aspects of conflict for us as a species are. So at Hartford Seminary, let's say, I focus on both, since I contribute the Jewish dimension to the curriculum there with my Muslim and Christian colleagues. To bring that into the mix, from my Jewish perspective, while trying to create together some holy whole that transcends the individual parts. So, I see myself as a Juman being. That's how I introduce myself. Hello, I'm Yechezkel, a Juman being. So, I try to do justice to the Jewish particularistic side of me and the human universal side of my being. So Hartford Seminary is an institution that invites people and trains people to find a kind of holy, holistic approach to each of our traditions individually and to our common challenge to heal this world. When I say each of our traditions individually, I have developed over time, but especially since I moved to Hartford, because my contact, especially with Palestinian Muslims, except for a few individuals, was politically contaminated. It was almost impossible to have spiritual conversations with Palestinian Muslims. Easier with Christians, but even that was difficult. In Hartford, there are Middle Easterners, there are Arabs, there are Iranians, Persians who come. So we have Sunni and Shia Muslims from the Middle East and from other places all over the world. So it's an international place of meeting. I took my glasses off because these are progressive lenses, okay? Which tells you how I view the world politically when I put these on. But there are three distances here, right? So when I read any scripture now, including my own, the Hebrew Bible, right now I try to read them with Abrahamic lenses, with three, it's not bifocals, trifocal lenses. So the kind of vicarious Christian and vicarious Muslim in me is trying to understand how would a Muslim or a Christian read this text in Hebrew or in translation. Same thing now for the New Testament or the Holy Quran. I think we need to develop those scriptural reading tools or lenses, all of us. Why stop at three? But at least in the Abrahamic family, which is very dysfunctional, part of the reason is we're not reading our texts and the prophecies and promises and messianic visions inclusively. They all basically have a triumphalistic streak in which, if not soon, by the end of time, we will win. We will win God's marathon race. We will get the gold medal at the end of the race. And if the other two make it even to the finish line and don't burn up in hell before that, they'll at best get the silver and the bronze. What is this? God is running an Olympic competition? Yes, according to our historically conditioned ways of reading our texts and saying our prayers a good part of the time. Even, I have to expand Val Kol Yisrael to include everybody else. What does peace mean for the Jews that doesn't include the rest of the world? How can we pray just for the peace of Israel? Isn't that That doesn't make any sense. It's unreasonable. What? We're gonna have peace in our own little Jewish bubble? What does that mean? If we're in conflict with somebody else, we just can't have peace by ourselves, for ourselves. But our traditions have, for whatever historical reasons, not helped us open up our minds, especially our imagination, to conceive of an egalitarian win-win-win-win outcome to history. So we need new lenses. Okay? I hope this course is, I'll have a little footnote, which is theological optometrists wanted. Inclusive interfaith optometrists are invited to come.
I'm gonna pass it on any questions.
Bryce.
Hi.
Hi. Wes, I see you, even though my back is to you.
It's fine.
I know you're here. And if you're gonna ask me some questions too, then I'll turn my chair around. Good. Okay. Yes, Bryce.
Okay. Sort of building off what you were talking about already. I'm wondering, how has your peace building been shaped by your life experiences and your personality? Particularly, if you could build on your education in psychology and your background in mysticism.
Well, I studied psychology partly because I realized we are very complex creatures, and as the Apostle Paul says, I'm a wretched person and I can't do what I know I should be doing. That we, in the field of religion, we profess, we preach certain things, and then we do the exact opposite. So what's going on psychically that keeps us so spiritually schizophrenic? Okay. How do we get on our own way? What are the psychological mechanisms that some people would say corrupt us? I would prefer to say limit us or hold us back from doing what we say God calls us to do and to be. So that's why I studied psychology, and that helps me stay compassionate even to people who I think are totally misguided, if not destructive. I try to understand where they're coming from. So it helps me appreciate that people who want to dominate are usually insecure. They can't share their toys in the sandbox or the land in Israel-Palestine. There's something insecure. There are deep fears probably at work, and maybe built up resentment based on the victimhood of their community that keeps them from imagining and then carrying out a liberating peace praxis for everybody. So psychology has helped me do that. And the mystical part helps me stay faithful to what I think God's creation has been created for, which is to bless us all and to test us all, or to enlist us all in the co-creation project or the redemption project. So, yeah, it helps to be a mystic if you want to stay hopeful. To believe that there are supernatural energies, there's a divine will that sustains our autonomic nervous system, from our breathing to our peacemaking. Everything is in God's hands.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could you share some specific instances of crises your communities have faced And after, if you could also share some moments of joy, maybe they're connected with those same crises.
Well, each time there is an outbreak of warfare, especially in Israel-Palestine, that has been a moment of crisis and deep anguish for me. I remember in June '82, when the Lebanon War, which was called Peace for Galilee, Shlom HaGalil, Mitzah Shlom HaGalil, the Peace for Galilee campaign, was carried out basically under Defense Minister Ariel Sharon. We in the peace movement could see that happening or being prepared for, and we couldn't stop it, and that was a moment of deep demoralization for me. I remember meeting a group of Presbyterian American visitors in the National Palace Hotel in East Jerusalem right after that war began, and it was the last thing I wanted to do was actually to talk about what was going on or meet a group of strangers. I just wanted to huddle in I didn't even want to get out of bed. So that was a really a low point for me, June 1982. Both intifadas. The second intifada in September 2000, after the Camp David process had basically collapsed. The summit earlier in the summer, Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat and President Bill Clinton had failed to reach some kind of an agreement. That was that deepened the level of toxicity, I think. I certainly felt that in my body. I was so sensitive to what was going on now with this terror war that had been unleashed. I had hives on my hands every day for 2 years. So, and when I came to Hartford, it kind of ended. So I got out of that toxic zone. You asked me about crises. So at each moment when moments of joy, I let's call them gratification. Okay, joy. I had personal moments of joy, but if we're talking about healing conflict, I'll reserve joy to moments of genuine peace. But I remember in the middle of toward the beginning of the second Intifada, we had a meeting in Ramle at Open House, where everybody was raw with pain and anger and grief and fear on both sides, Jews and Palestinian Israelis, sharing Ramle and other mixed communities in the state of Israel. There were 13 Palestinian citizens of Israel who were shot dead by security forces in October of 2000. So things were really heated and very intense, tense and intense. And we had a meeting in the backyard of Open House that I will never forget. It was very cathartic. People shared their feelings in a deep way, and that helped us go on because we had, by then, established trust and compassion and mutual care over 9 years. And we could now share, honestly, our feelings. And that's really important. So we're not strangers to each other. And we realized we were all implicated in this, and we were all co-responsible. And how were we going to move on? Our respective communities were now traumatized again. Another generation of children, every few years, a new generation of children that you think will be liberated from what their elders have undergone. No, it's a repeating cycle. In the second Intifada, you had dogs on Valium prescribed by veterinarians. A dog in my home every time there were explosions, we had helicopters overhead, we had tanks firing at Tanzim, militia fighters, near Gilo, that was just 2 hilltops away. So we could hear that, the little dog we had would just run into the closet. So teenagers were wetting their beds. They were regressing to bedwetting. It was really anti-human. But a session like the one in the backyard in Ramla gave me a sense of gratification because, okay, this network held. Many other coexistence organizations shut down with the second Intifada. They went, their operations were suspended because they just couldn't function in that intense and toxic a situation. And Open House stayed open and kept going and growing because we had created that network of mutual trust and care for 9 years. So I have no illusion that this happens slowly, and we get set back every time warfare erupts again. There's low-scale warfare all the time, but when you have a major confrontation, such as with Hamas every 2-3 years, it seems, just happens again.
Thanks.
They're other gratifying. I just have to say, every time I go into Open House and I see the little children and their faces and their laughter, and I use my elementary Arabic to communicate with them, I mean, that really is joyous. There I can say, okay, on a human-to-human level and cross-generationally, there's hope yet. Look at these innocent, hopeful little children.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, I want to go more deep inside. Okay, about the conflict, unlike the black or white or something like that, the Israelites and Muslims conflict are fratricide, right? Dividing between brothers, sisters, and siblings. It's like a family one, because Israelites and Muslim God have the same ancestor, so-called Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about they are family members, but somewhere on the line, they were separated by 2 parts. So in this light, is this fact matter to you while you're making the peaceful movement? I was wondering about that, because as I'm the Korean student, when I thought about the North Koreans, I want to make peace building with them, but it is really hard to them because I have already emotional conflict and emotional separate from them. So it is really hard to deal with that from person to person or people to people. They already killed my brothers and sisters, my families, even though they are my same ethnicities. So is this fact matter to you while making the peace building in the Israelites and Muslim?
Yes. I would say we're all brothers and sisters in the human family, okay? Biblically, Quranically, going back to Adam and Eve, okay? Whether you take that as literal or metaphorical history, we are all children of God, okay? Related fraternally. So every killing is a fratricide. So in the Semitic family, okay, Shem, one of the 3 children of Noah, with Ibrahim as a common ancestor and prophetic role model, yes, it matters to me that we don't understand what our ancestors, what their lives are supposed to teach us. Okay, so Abraham, to me, if we just look at, you mentioned Abraham, he's a model peacemaker to me. Right. Right now in Hebron, Al-Khalil, where he is buried, you have settler Jews, Palestinian, you have a group of 400 Jewish settlers with 100,000 Palestinian Muslims around them. And they now pray at different times in the Shrine of Machpelah or the Ibrahimi Mosque after the massacre by Baruch Goldstein of 29 Muslim worshippers in February 1994. So now they don't even go in there at the same time. So this is the most, the highest degree of unholiness of all. This particular place where Abraham and other patriarchs and matriarchs of my people are buried is being desecrated by these very strong negative feelings and spiritual contamination. So, Al-Khalil means the friend, the beloved friend of God. Abuna Ibrahim Khalil Allah. Abraham is God's beloved friend. Hebron comes from Chaver, which means friend, or Chibur, which means link or connection. So this is like Philadelphia in this country, the city of fraternal love. Well, Hebron Al-Khalil is the counter evidence that the children of Ibrahim, through Sarah and Hajar, can live together compassionately. Okay? But in my scriptures, in Genesis chapter 23, there's the story recounting how Abraham acquired that place in the first instance, which should teach us how to relate to our neighbors. Right? Because Sarah, his wife, dies. He doesn't have a piece of property at all. God has promised him 5 times already, your descendants will inherit the land. Trust me. Okay? The way you trusted me to get you here from Ur, trust me that everything will work out, and you look in all directions, and your descendants will inherit the land, which by the way means for me both Jews and Arabs descended from Ibrahim. But he doesn't need any physical assurance, doesn't need any installments on this process until his wife dies and he has to get a piece of land in which to bury her. And then, instead of saying to the Hittites, hey, the God of everything has promised me this land, and I've been very patient. I didn't lay claim to any of it. But now I'm laying claim actually to all of this city in the name of God, and my flag will fly here, and I'll be generous and make an autonomy plan for you, and you can maybe teach Hittite in your schools, and you can have a sanitation department, but the municipality is I will be the mayor. He could have said that. I often read holy texts for what they don't say. He could have said, but they don't. So he could have said, God has spoken to me 5 times. You want proof? My colleague, my Secretary of State here, Eliezer, will translate the first 12 chapters into Hittite for you. But he doesn't do that. He bows humbly and he says, Ger v'toshav anochi imechem. I'm a stranger and a sojourner here together with you. I have no special privileges, right? Whatever my personal relationship to God and my theology may be, I can't impose it on you. So I have to negotiate and I have to buy a piece of property, and he paid 400 shekels, that's not today's rate, for this holy cave and the trees around it. So that's where he's buried after he dies. Ishmael comes back to bury Abraham together with Isaac there. What does that say? Well, it says a lot of things. And in fact, rabbinic tradition says Isaac and Ishmael have actually been making peace, have been reconciled before the funeral of their father. Yes, if you connect the dots in certain ways. So the Abrahamic family has actually made peace back in Genesis, but we've blown it. We've totally misread what the texts are teaching us, I think. That's my belief. So yes, Wes, it matters greatly to me that these sacred stories, which have great resources for peace building, have been used and abused to exacerbate conflict. That's doing a disservice to God, and it makes me so upset I have to do this work. I think this is sacrilegious. What else can I say?
I'm going to step in because it's time to open to the group, and we have another half hour to engage with Dr. Landau about his work. So this is still the oral history part of our time, and I think we could probably take about 5 minutes for people to ask questions that have to do with his own personal journey, because we will come back and have more conversation with him about his work in that last half hour.
Hi. I'm Katie. I was very intrigued by your language at some points. Like, you used the word laboratory a lot, several times, and so I'm just wondering what's behind that for you a little bit. Can you speak more to that? Why, in your mind's eye, what do you see when you see laboratory, and why does that word adhere to the work that you're doing in your mind? And can you say more about that?
Yeah,
that metaphor?
very briefly, and a kind of a double word play, okay? So laboratory is based on labor, right? Yeah. In Hebrew it's called ma'abadah, which comes from la'avod, to work, avodah, which is work. It's also worship, okay? Worship and workshop are basically related. So it's a place of sacred work. That's what it is. Transformative work. You know, I don't want to go into alchemy and all of that metaphoric language, but the kind of transformation we're talking about of hearts and minds and spirits, it's a vessel for transformation. That's what it means for me.
It's rather audacious for me to make an assessment of who you are after an hour, but if I were to just use some words to describe how you come across, I'm not sure if it's hopeful, frustration about what you do, or frustrated hope. There's always hope, but at the same time you have almost a righteous anger going on, because you've obviously experienced a lot. You've also talked a lot about how faith and the divine, it has to be an integral part if we're going to find peace. And so you've mentioned the scriptures, but I'm wondering if in your own personal practices, how that has come to fruition for you. What are some specific practices that you follow coming out of your faith that help you keep the hope, even amidst the frustration of, man, I've been doing this for decades now?
My prayers, my meditations, my dream journaling are personal practices, sometimes done in community, but interfaith engagement for me is a spiritual practice in community, which expands my heart and awareness, both on the horizontal level with my fellow human beings, but also with, I can see God's presence in other religious commitments, paths to divine service. You're talking about frustrated hope?
Yeah, at the same time. I mean, you're still doing this, and so
I'm still doing it. Can you believe it? That I'm still doing it. Sometimes I can't believe it. If I say Psalms of Lament, you know what I'm talking about? There are 150 Psalms, right? In the Psalter, Zabur in the Islamic tradition, from Dawood, prophet, King Dawood. So the Psalms of Lament ring true for me, because usually the first half is kvetching, to use a nice Yiddish expression, complaining. Terrible things are going on, God. Why is this happening? Help me out of this. And then by the end, there's praise to God as the ground for any kind of transformation out of the things that we are lamenting. So I am a lamenter. Yes, lamentations that's part of my, more than anger, I'm deeply sad. Yes, I'm frustrated, but even more deeply than that, I'm very sad that our human species is failing God and itself too often. Okay, now I realize that what we get, the slice of reality we get through the news media, is distorted. Ugly, violent, hopeless news. See, if it bleeds, it leads. That's the main thing. So I don't judge the human species by what the news media report. But when you look at these conflicts, and especially those that go on for a long time, yes, you can get very frustrated, and I get very sad. And I look at the transformations in Southern Africa, the nonviolent transformations, largely nonviolent, in Southern Africa, in Ulster, Northern Ireland. In Eastern Europe, the Berlin Wall came down non-violently, right? Which I believe will happen in Israel-Palestine, that ugly wall that's being built for the security of my fellow Israelis, that will come down when we figure out this is not, we should build bridges and common wells of sacred wisdom rather than walls to separate us. Middle Easterners, we have the same DNA and basically the same capacity for wisdom that other people on our planet have. So I ask myself, what's taking Israel and Palestine so long when we have these other precedents and models to learn from? So that's a question I ask all the time. And I don't know, I actually share that with you. Why do we stay stuck longer than other places? Okay, we have ups and downs, and people get assassinated. Sadat and Rabin got assassinated. One of the reasons that more compassionate or wiser leaders get eliminated. And they're, you know, we haven't seen a Mandela yet come out of Israel or Palestine. But there could, I mean, I can imagine that there are people. You know, I would like to see an Israeli prime minister negotiate secretly with Marwan Barghouti in prison, who was the leader of the Tanzim militia in the Second Intifada, and is kind of the most trusted political prisoner among Palestinians, both Hamas and Fatah. He could be a uniting force. If we in Israel were serious about peace, we would be negotiating with him and then letting him out of jail and work out adjacent sovereignties pretty quickly. So it's doable, but there are political and psychological obstacles, and those are it frustrates me because I could see a path to a political agreement that would then lower the level of animosity and allow another generation to grow into that. I could see that happening with the help of outside mediators and facilitators, especially Americans, but not only Americans. And it's not happening, so. And I have to add, this is a really important reminder. This bilateral conflict cannot be seen independently of the regional array of conflicts. It is a very complex regional challenge for humanity. So what's happening in Syria and Lebanon and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Iran and Iraq are all part of the bigger picture. So especially for Israeli Jews, one of the reasons a Palestinian state stays in the womb for decades and hasn't been midwifed into reality is because Israeli Jews fear it can be used by other neighbors as a staging ground to attack and defeat Israel. So Palestinians are sometimes pawns in a larger, deadly, it's not a game, but the whole situation. So it can't be dealt with in isolation. So that's something we should be aware of.
Let's close this now with just the oral history part, because we would like to have some more conversation with you about your work, and Salma's going to engage with you on that. And I want to say a huge thank you to you, Yehezkel, for sharing your story, and a huge thank you for our grand interview team. Thanks.
Yes.
So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to Yehezkel more about the work he does at Hartford Seminary and connect it to some of the experiences he shared. I'm going to let him do a lot of the talking because my voice is not stellar right now, so I apologize. But I figured you could start with telling us about the Building Abraham Partnerships program and how it came about and who your partners have been and the participants have been over the years.
Okay. I came to Hartford from Jerusalem in the fall of 2002. By June of 2004, with the endorsement of the seminary leadership and my faculty colleagues, I had designed this interfaith training program and recruited women and men from all three traditions to have a gender-balanced teaching staff, a combination of academics and pastoral leaders. Right now, a woman rabbi, a woman minister, and a male imam to be the kind of pastoral leadership team to carry this week-long learning experiment, adventure, and especially to intervene when people's comfort zones were stretched or kind of challenged. And we've done this basic training, and I have some brochures to leave with you if you want to do it from this June 7th to 14th or next year, God willing, inshallah, if we have the resources. It does take some funding, especially for scholarship assistance and the kosher halal food, and not to mention the honoraria for the teachers who come from the outside. The way it's been conceived, it's a course that you can get 3 academic credits for, graduate credits, but it's more than just an intellectual experience of learning about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and where their common denominators or affinities may be, but it's really a laboratory for engaging practitioners, believers in those different faith communities. So the experiential dimension is at least as important, with certain process methodologies built in to help us over the course of a week, and it's very deliberately planned to become more heart-opening and gut-affecting over time, so that by the end people really feel transformed. So all the information is in the service of transformation. And I could just share with you, well, three process tools. One is a series of guidelines for compassionate conversation, respectful and compassionate engagement through the week that we all agreed to at the very beginning. I could share those with you. It's been a composite that Reverend Karen L. Smith and I basically came up with at the very beginning. And it starts with listening before you speak, and when you do speak, use I language, things like that. Let people speak for themselves. Let the quieter voices invite them to share. And listen for feelings underneath the words with as much empathy as you could bring into it. So we do that at the very beginning. And we say, okay, we have a methodology we call ouches and wows, which maybe you've used in some form. If somebody feels upset, irritated along the way, she or he can say, interrupt and say, ouch, and that person's irritation or grievance or confusion will be attended to in real time, or it'll be parked and a few minutes later that will be addressed. There are more intra-faith ouches than interfaith ouches, we have found. When people don't use I language and they speak for their whole faith community, and somebody else from that faith community says, ouch, speak for yourself. Okay, the other side of the coin is a wow, which people are invited to say when they are delighted, surprised, amazed, pleased by something they didn't know. another community had in its treasure chest of spiritual resource. And those usually don't need much elaboration. I think, well, both are instructive. They're learning opportunities, but the ouches are really the places where we can stretch and grow and develop new appreciation, not just of somebody else, but of ourselves. Ooh, I had that reaction, I had that allergic reaction. Where did that come from? Okay, which is why you need people with pastoral training to accompany the course. It's not enough just to have, excuse me for saying this, a PhD, with all due respect. Not enough. Not enough. Could be necessary, but insufficient. Or any kind of doctor. And then the third process technique we use comes from this book, Cool Tools for Hot Topics, that Ron Crable and Evelyn Wright published in this good book series that Mennonites have published. You know these? Have you used them already? Nice series. So there's a technique called the fishbowl exercise. Have you ever done that here? Have you used it here?
Not in this class.
Not in this class. Has any of you done this? Inner and outer circles? Structurally, it's very simple. Psychologically, it's a serious challenge. Emotionally. So since we have three subgroups of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, on Monday, which is Judaism Day, we have Jews in the course sitting in an inner circle with Christians and Muslims outside. On the second day, given over to Christianity, Christians are in the inner circle. The Wednesday of the week, Muslim participants are in the inner circle with Jews and Christians on the outside. And over these 3 days, for as long as it takes, each person has up to 3 minutes to answer a simple question. What do you need to experience from the other two faith communities in order to trust them more? Amazing things come out in the testimonies over 3 days. And no, the people on the outside cannot react, interrupt. They just have to listen. So this is an exercise in active, compassionate listening. And it's only on Thursday evening. This begins on a Sunday evening and goes till the next Sunday evening. Begins with the dinner, ends with the dinner, and it's lubricated with a lot of kosher halal goodies for the tummy, and consecrated meals blessed inclusively by everybody. So by Thursday evening, that's when we process the 3 fish bowls. So there's enough familiarity and trust hopefully developed by then that people can speak honestly about their pain and frustration and anger. A lot of stuff comes out. It's cathartic, which I think is absolutely necessary if you want to integrate. And see, my pedagogy is holistic. If we're from the neck up, we won't change very much. Maybe an attitude, but our lives won't be transformed unless we get the heart and the gut and the head all integrated. Do I have examples of one?
Yeah, what are the notable things that have come out in those fishbowl conversations?
Ooh, wow. Well, there was a whole well of tears that an African American Muslim woman shared. That was on the 3rd day. So she talked about her mother, the pain she carried when her mother died, according to her account, because a Jewish doctor didn't diagnose the condition accurately or didn't prescribe the correct medicine. So she was blaming this Jewish doctor, and then that was extended to other Jewish people. So that was one. There was a Singaporean Muslim woman in another group who cried when she said what it meant to come to the United States and have her hijab, head covering, seen as a threat rather than a symbol of devotion to God, and how that discrepancy deeply, deeply pained her. There was another Singaporean man, a Muslim man, who had actually shaved off his beard to get through airports. He thought that was the sacrifice he had to make to come into the United States and not be seen as a terrorist threat. So there are things like that. Yeah, there are Jews, some Jews are somewhere between skeptical and really fearful of how Israel is going to be judged, or Jews are going to be judged. So anti-Jewish stereotypes have been internalized, so they are fearful that in encounter, they'll be outnumbered by Christians and Muslims 2-1, and Israel will be bashed. There are all kinds of things that come out, especially if there's a hot war going on in the Middle East. Just some examples. Some Christians are baffled by all of this emotional baggage that Jews and Muslims are carrying about the Middle East. And they think they are somehow, they start feeling guilty about not being so emotionally invested. But then we invite them to help heal this conflict because they are not so trapped or conditioned. Yes, help Jews and Muslims work this out. Be healers by not choosing up sides, you know, and we know, you know, that throughout the Christian world you have the pro-Israel and pro-Palestine camps, right? You have Christian Zionists and you have third world liberationists, and they have different theologies and eschatologies and a lot of interesting, fascinating. This is where psychology helps. These are all Christians. They're all following Jesus. They're all disciples of the same Lord and Master, and they come out with totally opposite political theologies. And I, as a Jew, I'm either conscripted to fight the Muslim Antichrist over here, or I'm the oppressor of Palestinians over here. And I thought, well, wait a minute, these caricatures of me are not accurate. So let's talk about this.
I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the Christian perspective. Just maybe we don't go into it, but it was interesting for me going to Israel-Palestine with a group of mostly Christians after having gone twice with a group of mostly Muslims visiting a Jewish rabbinic institute, because it was this very different space, and I felt I don't want to say not emotional, but just a lot dry. I mean, I don't know if people who else was on the trip can comment on that, but it didn't feel nearly like the level of emotion was not anywhere close to the level of emotion when I was traveling with Muslims. It was very interesting. So I don't know if you have any.
Yes, I mean, very similar in parallel response where I think it was a relationship to the space where it, even just kind of traveling, it was very Lightfoot. Where it didn't feel
really bizarre.
like going, for me, other Jewish members, it was not the same relationship to this space.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah, it feels very parallel.
But that was an aside. Let me ask you more specifically about the difference in your work in Israel-Palestine versus here, because obviously in the U.S. you don't have, although you're talking about all these emotions that come up, but because it's so much less of a fraught space, and you referred to it a little bit, that you really weren't able to develop the kinds of spiritual relationships with Palestinians when you were living in Israel-Palestine as here.
With rare exception.
With rare exceptions.
If they were willing.
And I'm just wondering, I mean, it's just such a different type of work, and I'm just wondering how you connect the two. Because for me, as I was saying during the break, sometimes interfaith work can drift into a level of superficiality that becomes frustrating. And I think it takes a lot of leadership and intentionality to keep it in a space that's important. And for you, obviously, it's connected in some deep way to some real areas of conflict. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that relationship.
I agree that there are interfaith settings which stay politically neutral, and we would say parva, which means neither meat nor dairy. It's just superficial, like vanilla ice cream rather than, Jamocha almond fudge. So, and I'm not saying that's totally unwarranted, but that's playing it safe, and you get certain benefits, and you focus on commonalities, and you stay spiritual and totally apolitical. There's actually a group of Muslims and Jews in the Hartford area who created something called a brunch bunch of couples that meet for Sunday brunch once a month. And they stay away from the Middle East for 2 years until last summer's war brought out suppressed feelings that were very strong, so intense. They invited Abdullah and Tepli and me to come and do a retreat day to facilitate them getting over a kind of cathartic hurdle so they could move forward because they were stuck with their strong emotions they didn't know how to process. Yeah. So you can get caught blindsided by trying to stay kind of politically uninvolved or unengaged. So, but from the get-go, for me, transformation, which the human species desperately needs, requires some kind of emotional catharsis and heart-opening, heart-expanding engagement with what you fear. And the other person is the embodiment often of what you fear. And ignorance feeds those fears. So if you can break down through personal engagement much more than you can ever get in a book, what the resistance to change that's in you, that's conditioned over a lifetime, how do you do that in a week? Or even in one encounter, or 5, or a series of encounters that build relationships? That's what I think we need to do. So I don't know how much can be programmed into it. You know, there's Neve Shalom Wachat Salam, this mixed village of Israeli Jews and Palestinians, about 15 minutes from Ramla. It's like Corrymeela in Northern Ireland, an intentional community. They have a school for peace, and their methodology for a long, long time has been throw political bombs into the middle of the circle immediately and let's see what happens. You know, let the shrapnel fly and let people engage it. It works or it doesn't work. Let's say it even works. I'm more a slow evolutionist. I want to build trusting relationships before we get to the landmines, you know, or the hand grenades. Yeah, but I want to get there, but not right away. And we tell the people, we're going to deal with this, but not in the first hour and not on the first day, and we'll do the fish bowls and then we'll process it on Thursday night. Yeah.
And I guess the question is also like, is there a need, and maybe there isn't, you know, to connect interfaith peace building here in the U.S. with conflicts that are happening elsewhere, or is it enough just to work to strengthen communities locally?
And they're without conflict? What does it mean to strengthen a community locally? You think conflict is only international? That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
I don't.
No, I get the point.
To me, building community, since conflict is a given in the human condition, starting with each of us individually, we're all conflicted. We're conflicted individuals. So you wanna have a relationship. You want to have a family, you want to have a marriage, you want to have a friendship, you want to build a neighborhood and avoid conflict.
Right.
I mean, that's doesn't make sense.
Right.
Okay, so, but some people may aspire to do that, or pretend, or sweep it under the rug, and then it'll come back to haunt you. So yes, I agree that engaging conflict is part of this work, inevitably, inherently. How you do that, I mean, you have to be strategic about it. Have enough wisdom not to touch on the most toxic or neuralgic, pain-inducing subjects immediately. Other people will go home. Yeah. I'm gonna pour salt in your wound in the first hour of this encounter, and let's see how you feel. I mean, that's kind of, why would you do that if you want this to last?
Right.
Right, you'll just confirm people's fears and expectations of uselessness.
Related to this, you've been crystal clear about the importance of small communities, intentional communities, laboratories, and so forth, to build these kind of relationships. In the meantime, public discourse, public rhetoric goes on. Are there ways to discipline public discourse so as to maximize the possibility that people will be able to work together and build these relationships. And here's I'll give an example. So when a Palestinian writes or speaks about Israel as empire, that sparks immediate responses among Jews in this country and in Israel.
Yes.
So that rhetoric in the public discourse names a real issue, but it also creates a kind of alienation in the larger public. How do you see the public discourse going forth in a way that complements the kind of work that you're talking about, that's on the ground, intense, and takes time?
Well, along the way, it does take time, but along the way, people involved in this can share through blogs or social media, generally, the lessons they've learned. Two of the people from this brunch bunch actually put on the West Hartford Patch a co-authored reflection after this retreat that Abdullah and I co-facilitated, what this 2-year investment in this, building this network of relationships among couples, how they had benefited. So that was an attempt to bring something positive and inspirational into the public discourse. Okay, if you're thinking of Mitri Rachev's latest book?
Yes, but it's also come to me in another setting, in another interfaith setting where I was involved. I became aware that this whole language of empire is not just in Mitri's book, but in larger conversations, is evoking a lot of response.
Yes, probably negative response, certainly from Jews. So actually, I don't know, Mitri Rachev's he's a Lutheran Palestinian pastor and theologian, a friend of mine and colleague for 30 plus years, who was actually hosted at Hartford Seminary some months ago when he was promoting the book. And I hugged him and thanked him for coming, and then I wrote him a long email saying that this empire language is probably going to alienate the people who, at least in the Jewish community, who need to be changed. Okay? So if you want to specify human rights violations and the hardships imposed on Palestinians by Israeli official behavior, politically, militarily, economically, legally, all of those policies that cause harm and are obstacles to peace, you can itemize them without ideologizing this and calling Israel, which is after all a little tiny country, an empire, right? Or a satellite of the American empire, whatever. So that kind of ideologizing of the human experience, I think, is an obstacle for real interhuman communication, and it shuts people down so they won't hear the pain, the frustration, the anger on the other side. So, and we both need to hear that from each other. So even the phrase, the war on terror, I hate that phrase as an abstraction of symptoms of spiritual pathology that we have to confront. In non-military ways, the war on terror, well, we are already doomed to fail in terms of transforming anything for the better. This goes back to 9/11. If 9/11 had been seen not as an attack on the United States, but as a war crime against humanity, which is what Kofi Annan, then Secretary General of the UN, understood, we would have had a different response. We would have mobilized the UN well, the perpetrators were dead, but the people who sent them, they would have been war criminals and they would have been captured, hopefully, like Milosevic and others, or the people from Africa, Liberia, and brought to The Hague and put on trial. That's it. You want to send bombers to fight a war on terror rather than a scourge in the body of humanity. What can I say? This is a primitive human response, the fight or flight response. Somebody attacks you or threatens you, you're going to fight with all the resources in your arsenal. Not helpful, usually. Sometimes necessary, on rare occasions. I'm not a pacifist, but I don't think that this whole approach but it starts with how you conceive it, label it, analyze it. If you have that kind of diagnosis of what the disease or the pathology or the real threat is, so that's just an extension from empire language.
Very helpful.
It's dehumanizing. And we need to humanize or rehumanize one another. That's requirement number one, yes.
Is there more time for a question?
Maybe one more, then we have to go.
Is it okay if I?
Yeah, sure.
I've heard pieces throughout what you've shared of insights to the American culture, political climate, things like that. And I'm aware of the unique background that you've had of being, for the most part, raised in America, spent a significant amount of time in Israel, and then back here. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about perhaps how that experience in Israel helped maybe open your eyes to the reality of things here, or where that awareness was born, and how you've been able to continue to live with that perhaps inner conflict, maybe not, but being an American and an Israeli while you're now here in America.
Well, that's a deep existential challenge. I have an inner dialogue between my two passports. One represents me as a Jewish minority, and one as a Jewish majority in a sovereign Jewish state with non-Jewish minority communities. So those are two different perspectives on the Jewish condition globally, existentially, historically. So I have there's a tension, a great tension between the two. Having lived there and still remaining an Israeli, having a 27-year-old son there, feeling deeply committed, grants me some degree of credibility here in America, including American Jews that, let's say, left-leaning Jews who haven't been spending years and years in Israel may not have. They may not be granted by their Jewish listeners. So just within the Jewish community, I can say things, or I can always say things. People can hear me saying things because of my, if I say I was a reserve soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces for 13 years, that in a non-combat role, so I can, they'll say, oh, okay, well, you put on a uniform and held a gun, and that gives me a little more credibility, And then I'll say, yes, but a military solution to this is not going to work. Oh, okay. I don't know if that helps any, but it's that's just the Jewish part of me, without the Jew-man being part of me. We have. Oh my goodness, we're coming out of Egypt again next week, right? Yes. Well, I'm not the first one to say it's easier to take the Jews out of exile than to take the exile out of the Jews, or take the Egypt out of the Jews, whatever Egypt symbolizes. Okay, and we have to ask ourselves, to what are we enslaved? What are our psychic or emotional addictions? What can't we give up? What do we really need to be liberated? All of us, right? The Exodus story is a universal one, just like Fiddler on the Roof. Well, I thank you. I thank you for this opportunity. Take one of these. My email is in here. Be in touch. Hope to see you again. When does this course end? When is the last session of the course?
The last Tuesday of April, I think it is.
Last Tuesday. Well, okay. I'll
It's the 28th.
I'll get some sense of what this whole experience has meant for you. But I'm glad you're empowering yourselves through this school and a course like this to go out and make the needed changes in our different societies. Where's Wes? Wes, where are you? Okay. I haven't been to Korea, but any conflict in the world affects all of us, right? Yes. So we're all in pain. We're all afflicted, and this is the Pauline image of the different organs in the one body, whether it's the body of Christ or the body of humanity, it's true. It's true. Okay, I want to thank you.
so much.
Thank you.